always telling your stories, and it's time someone tells ours. We're humans first, journalists second. We chose this career to give you a voice. Now we're voicing ours. It's true, journalism has much room for improvement, but not all hope is lost, and we want your trust back by humanizing one journalist at a time. We're sharing with you what we go through to bring you the news. The pain, the tears, the trauma, and the mental health struggles. It's painful, and sometimes we even work 2 jobs to make ends meet. But we all have something in common. The passion, the joy, and the love we feel for storytelling and holding the powerful accountable. That includes holding ourselves accountable. So here are stories from us. This is how we want to help improve the news industry. The Awakened Journalist is proud to present Media Healers by Emiliana Molina Fajardo. Hi everyone, welcome back to The Awakened Journalist and our special project Media Healers. Today we have the honor of having with us Janet Rodriguez. She's a multiple Emmy-award winning journalist and was in the news industry for 15 years. She resigned from Univision after more than 5 years as the network's White House correspondent on December 2021. She was the first person to hold this job as a White House correspondent, and throughout her career, she has been a pioneer paving the way for many female journalists. She's worked in Phoenix, in Chicago, and Washington D.C. for both major Hispanic news platforms in the United States, Telemundo and Univision, and she is now the internal communications manager for What's Up. So welcome, Janet. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Emiliana. What an honor for you to interview me. This is very weird to be on the other side of the camera, but I'm very looking forward to this conversation.
Amazing. I'm so honored that you're here. Janet, so let's start from the beginning. How did you start your news industry and your decision to become a journalist? And I know you started, I believe, in Disney Radio, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right, when I was in high school. So I came to the US when I was 12, and my very first interaction with media at the time, the Clinton impeachment progress was happening on TV, and I had come from Cuba. I immigrated from Cuba, whereas you never covered a president the way the media covered the president in the US. Democracy was not, there was no democracy basically, and there was no freedom of the press. So watching this on TV was very eye-opening. I was like, wow, journalists can actually cover a president. They can actually take a president out of power. There is such a process, and nobody's going to get jailed, beaten, or taken out of their jobs by actually speaking against the leader of the country. So that really was very inspiring. And ever since, I knew I wanted to be a journalist and I wanted to cover politics. So little by little, I started getting my feet wet. Yes, I was a radio disc jockey for Radio Disney when I was in high school. And from then on, I had a number of internships that paved my way to be a television reporter and meet people along the way that opened many doors many years later. But yeah, I went to journalism school here at American University in Washington, D.C. And from then on, it was just a full-on journalism career. Never really deviated from my plan to be a political reporter until I landed at the White House.
And this was the first position as a White House correspondent, and you opened that position for Univision. And you actually had a lot of firsts throughout your career as well. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So no job in the 15 years that I was on TV, no job that I ever held was held by anyone before me, which was really crazy and really weird, but that's just the way it happened. My first job was as a local news reporter here in DC, and that was for the first ever 11 p.m. newscast that local Telemundo station had at the time. They were opening that newscast. I came and filled a role for that reporter position that had to cover the night shift. Then I went on to Phoenix, the same thing, started with a newscast that was being launched at the time, and then on to Chicago, where I became a Midwest correspondent, and I opened that bureau. We opened it from scratch. There was nothing existed there at the time. And my photographer and I built that bureau from the ground up at Telemundo. And then I went on to be the first White House correspondent for Univision. Univision decided at the time that they were committed with having a full-time correspondent at the White House. They wanted more visibility. They wanted for somebody to be there scrutinizing the administration, the president, day in and day out. I started with the Obama administration. Soon after, we were able to get us a seat at Univision in the press briefing. And today, Univision is on the fourth row of that press briefing, present there every day. So I take great pride in what we were able to accomplish in the 5.5 years that I was there as a White House correspondent.
A lot, huge accomplishments, huge challenges, right? Because I'm sure it wasn't easy to be the first at so many positions. It's like you were paving the way into the unknown throughout your whole career. How did that feel for you? And did you feel supported along the way by your news directors or your team?
For sure, it was a great responsibility to be the first, to be learning the market, to be developing new stories, getting to know the audience, finding the trust of that audience, because you land in a place that nobody knows you, nobody really knows whether you're there to tell their stories or to just whether you're going to be an ally or not, what's happening. So, and being from a Cuban background, I always worked in very Mexican heavy cities like Chicago and Phoenix. So that was also a cultural experience as well, having to cover that, that population with, many would think that we're all Latinos are created equal, but that's not the way it is. And we all have many different issues that we need to cover and bring to light. So it was a great learning experience. One thing that I look back and I say, well, you know what? I did it all by myself. I never had a single manager come visit me in Chicago for the 3 years that I was there in that bureau. No news director, no producer that I can remember. Nobody ever came to our bureau to see how we were doing, to see what we had accomplished in terms of location, office, to check out our needs, how we worked, what was happening in our day in and day out. And I would say the same for when I was at the White House. We didn't have one time in 5.5 years, we had the news director at the time, the president of news, come and visit the bureau while I was there. So I was always away from the action in terms of headquarters. And I think there was a little bit of forgetness that we were out there and we needed support, because we always did the job. We delivered, we were on the news. We never failed the mission. So in a way, I think managers were like, okay, she's fine. She doesn't need any help from us. Whatever, she's doing the work. But in turn, from my perspective, it was like, it would be nice if somebody showed up here and see how we actually do the work, our struggles, our needs, and how we need to be supported.
And let's talk a little bit about that. What were some of the struggles, some of the needs, how you would have liked to be supported? Because we were talking on the phone before we did this interview, and I know you mentioned how difficult it was to cover certain news stories and not even get asked by managers or anyone along throughout your career, hey, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Are you okay? Do you need resources to cope with this?
And I don't think that's unique to me, right? I think that comes with our work and what we do day in and day out. We come into news circumstances. Often news is not good news. We're rushed right in, we're rushed right out, and we go to the next, right? And we don't have time to process the pain that we may be feeling, the personal feelings that we might have attached with that story. And sometimes we don't even have time to attach to a story. But when I was doing my exit interview with Univision, they called me and they were like, what happened? Why did you decide to go? And I retrospectively started thinking about the whys. I had never thought about this before. Yeah. But after the Trump administration, the one thing that did happen to me was that on Inauguration Day, I was covering the inauguration of Joe Biden as president, and I started crying on air when I saw him walk into the White House, and that had never really happened to me. I'm not an emotional person. I tend to hold myself. I'm very serious and collected. And nobody ever really truly checked in as to what just happened to Janet. Why was she crying? Where were those emotions coming from? We were living in a city that was completely militarized at the time. We had just gone through the January 6th insurrection, which luckily I was on vacation, and looking back, I would have not. I praise all of my colleagues who were there that day, and I'm just very lucky that I wasn't. And and then retrospectively, I started thinking of, and I was telling this person who was interviewing me, I wish somebody throughout my career, whether it was upper management or people that I worked with day in and day out, asked, "Are you okay? Do you need something? What can I give you time off? How are you processing that shooting, that fire, that whatever it may be that I just covered?" But that's just not the nature of the business. We are often in front of the camera, being the strong person covering the news, and then managers are tasked, right, with a lot of heavy lifting themselves back in the bureaus, because they have to handle, so many of us, and they have to handle the newscasts and the ratings and this and that. And in the middle of it all, in the middle of the craziness, I guess it gets lost that we're still human, that we still have feelings, that we still need to process those feelings. And if we don't, I think we get burnt out the way I did, and then we exit the business.
And the way many of us have gone burnt out, right? Janet, and can I ask you, what were those emotions? Why did you tear up as Biden was being inaugurated?
Yeah, it was, like I said, the city was militarized at the time. We were having to show up to the office with the National Guard was around us, people with long guns. It looked like our office was completely boarded with the metal screens in front of it. So it was like almost we had to go through checkpoints to get into an office, which you would think it was a safe place, because our location was right in front of the Capitol. So it was all within the perimeter that they had set up for the Capitol. So it just did not resemble the place that I knew, my DC, my home, my, everything. I have a small child. So everything was just bubbling inside. And during the 4 years of the Trump administration, we lived through so much. We never had time to pause and understand how heavy everything was. And it's just the amount of news that we were having to consume and then produce out. And I remember just thinking, now we're okay. Are we safe? Like, he made it to the White House. We didn't have a bomb go off at inauguration. We didn't have any violence. Thankfully, this went through, and it just a heavy lift off my shoulders that we were able to get through that day without anything big or traumatic or violent happen to us as journalists.
Yeah, in a sense, it felt kind of like DC was maybe in a war zone, literally.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Wow. It's a lot of heaviness, and I understand completely where you're coming from. And I'm so grateful for your service and for the work that you continue doing as a journalist, because you, from what I'm hearing, continued to push through the job to deliver a service to the audience, regardless of how you were feeling inside and how unsafe it felt to be in DC as a White House correspondent, covering all of this during that time and during those elections in 2016. And thank God that you weren't there for the day of the Capitol Hill situation, because we know a lot of colleagues that were there, and it was extremely painful and traumatizing.
Yeah, for sure. And some of the colleagues that work with me day in and day out at Univision, and I know it was really hard for them. It's just hard. And I think after I saw myself crying on air and I caught my emotions and all of that, it definitely marked a before and after. And after that, I started feeling my emotions a lot more and letting myself be vulnerable. The week that we covered the Afghanistan withdrawal, it was a week-long coverage. I was not there, obviously. I was here in DC, and I cannot understand. I cannot imagine what my colleagues on the ground were having to go through, because here at home, I was in tears every day when I was coming home, just from having to watch all those images of people suffering, the desperation in people, the kids crying, all of those the crying kids made me go back to my own child and hold him very tight at night and understand how lucky we were to live in this country and to have all the privileges that we had. But it was affecting me very much as a person to have to cover that, because you can't turn it off, right? As a journalist that covering the story, even though you're not there, you're rewatching the images or writing to the images. You are trying to get more images to fill your package. So it's like your constant consumption of these visuals that impact you. It really does. And then slowly but surely, I realized that more of this world events and here at home, U.S. events that I was having to cover that were just emotional were chipping away at my vulnerabilities. And I was just coming home not feeling all that great. And that's when I decided, you know what? I have a great job. I earn very well. I have no need to leave this job other than I need to be happy, and I'm not happy right now. And this is not fulfilling my emotions. That coming home from a job where I'm having, where I'm just crying every other night because of something I covered it's not a good place to be. And I realized it's time. Maybe, I think the best time to leave is, when you're at the top. I actually think that. So I was like, okay, this is, everybody's going to remember me as the best, maybe not the best, but the first White House correspondent. I think I have done a great job, and now it's time to take a step back before I no longer can deliver the news in the best way that I can.
Yeah, and you touched on so many important points in the answer to the question. And it's the constant consumption that we live in, right? Even though you weren't physically on the field covering the troops in Afghanistan, just witnessing and observing those videos and those images, there is such a thing as secondary trauma, and there is such a thing as moral injury, right? When we are observers and we can't necessarily do something about the situation, it feels like I'm thinking of the word in Spanish, impotencia. I can't think of it in English. But you feel like you want to do something, but you can't, right?
And you can't because you're a journalist, right? So it's not like you can go become an activist or fight for the troops or the withdrawal, or become openly, opinionated about what you're seeing on Twitter. So you got to keep your straight face. You got to report the news as unbiased, factual circumstances, whatever they may be. But you're holding back on all of the things you want to say that you just can't. It's not your role to say it. It's not your place to be that person of opinion. For that, you go, be an editorial writer or be a book writer, be something else, but you cannot be that journalist anymore.
Yeah, and it's a common sentiment among journalists, and I'm wondering if, I have more questions than answers and more questions than solutions, but I'm wondering if maybe it's time for a change in our reporting, right? Because we're forced to not feel on camera. We're forced to not show your emotion on camera because of fear of becoming the protagonist and taken away from the story or from the news. But at what cost, right? Because then we're becoming extremely detached from our emotions, being on the field and covering these kinds of stories. And I'm wondering what your opinion is as to how the news industry can improve upon that, and if there is different and better ways to cover the news so that we could also process what we're living and going through as we're telling the stories.
I don't know that I have an answer for that either, because I do truly believe in the job of the journalist is to be impartial storyteller of the facts. That's your job. That's your role. You should not take sides. You should not become an advocate. You should not be posting on Twitter, but you should have the space to process, like we said, feelings and emotions and all of that. And maybe that comes with more time off. Maybe that comes with more flexibility. Maybe that comes with more resources of having more reporters on the ground covering the one story and not just the same reporter covering the same story for the next 24 hours. That comes with mental health resources, whether it's psychologists on staff to be able to deal with, talk to reporters that come back from traumatic situations. I don't think there is a one solution or one solve for this problem. It has to be a big encompassing, many things have to come together. But I also don't think that the journalist should take the role of an advocate and should be voicing their opinion openly. Then that just takes away from the job and the responsibility that we have to tell both sides of the story. But something's got to change. I just think it has to be behind the scenes, in the way that our management, our companies are supporting the work that we do.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Janet, one story that you've felt extremely proud of throughout your career and that really touched or impacted your life in a positive way?
Oh God, I think the stories that I knew weren't going to be told by any other means. So those stories where you show up and you see la abuelita, or, the really vulnerable people that are not getting attention otherwise. The migrants at the border, the father. I interviewed a father whose son had been killed by Albuquerque Police Department. We did a whole series about police brutality in Albuquerque, and they were under DOJ supervision, and many things have changed since. But that father whose son had been murdered and nobody had ever knocked on his door to ask about how things happened. Those people, those stories that had no other avenue of seeing the light of day. Those were the most impactful story. Obviously, being in front of, for example, I got to cover Pope Francis, Papa Francisco, his first visit to the U.S., like being there when he gave mass in Philadelphia. That was like, and I'm not a Catholic, a practicing Catholic. I'm not a religious person. I'm very agnostic, if you ask me. But those are things that mark you that I will never forget. And covering three presidents was an honor. I mean, an honor of a lifetime, being able to ask questions of three leaders of the free world, President Obama, Trump, and Biden. Wherever your politics fall, nobody will ever take that away from me, that I was able to cover three dignitaries in that. No, at that scale, being with them day in and day out for part of the time that we're at the White House. So it's been a career full of very impactful, very good stories. I think I was very lucky to be a lot of times at the right place at the right time to cover a lot of big news. So I've always cherished everything I covered. And I've never had a favorite one thing other than, and I loved, one thing that I did love was covering kids. Anything that had to do with kids and kids stories always, filled up my day, from a mariachi, like school band, to a rowing team of low income students in Chicago, to anything that had to do with profiling the future, and that these are the people who are going to make our country bigger and better in the future. That always was very inspiring.
I love that. Yeah, that I feel the same way. I used to love covering stories with kids or going to schools. And then lastly, before we finish the interview, we already talked a little bit about what the news industry can improve upon as well. And one thing I wanted to ask you is, how was maternity for you while you were in the industry? Did you feel like you had enough support? Was it extremely challenging?
It was challenging. We don't get enough now, being on the private sector and seeing what my colleagues get. I just got off a call right before this interview with a colleague who will get up to a year off if it's her choice to take off a year. She can take off a year because she has that possibility within her, her function and where she works, and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. We obviously, I was lucky to be able to take 5 months off because the DC laws protected me at the time, not because my company allowed it, just because they were forced to follow DC law. And I had up to 6 months off, yet at some point it became a cost benefit. I had to go back to work because it was costing me not to. Because childcare is expensive, maternity is expensive, diapers are expensive, everything was expensive. So at some point you said, okay, if I'm at work, I can pay for all of this expensive. If I'm not, I'm just taking time off without pay that I cannot necessarily afford. So that was an issue. And then after I went back to work, yeah, I mean, my husband was carrying the load for God, go love him and thank him because he was making dinners. I knew when I was leaving, for work, I never knew when I was coming back. And that meant that he was cooking dinner, taking care of Leo after the nanny left. He was picking up the leftovers, whatever it may be that he had to do that afternoon until I came home after the newscast. And it came to a point where, you put it all in a balance when Univision decided to go to a streaming service, and I saw the writing on the wall that there was going to be more work with less resources, and my day was just going to get longer and longer, and there were going to be more asks of me. I decided that I didn't want to miss out anymore, and I didn't want to put that big burden on my husband anymore. And I needed a job where I could have a lot more flexibility. And that didn't mean that I didn't want to be on TV or that I want to quit my journalism career. It just meant that at this time and place in my life, I needed a break and I needed to focus on other things. And maybe I'll go back to journalism one day when my kid is bigger, can make dinner for himself, I don't know, can help his dad in the afternoon chores. But for now, I needed to be present, and I'm enjoying it so much, so much.
And question for you, how did you place boundaries when that streaming service started, or when news directors start asking more of you than what we can deliver and you start feeling that workload and that burnout?
I said no. One time I was asked to do a live shot from home at 8 p.m. at night when this whole process started. And I said, no, absolutely not. This is my sacred time. This is time at home. This is a time where I've come and disconnected from the day. But it's hard, right? It's so hard. And I knew that those no's were not sustainable, that you had to start saying yes at some point, because I also understand that you work in an industry where airtime has to be filled and you are in front of it and you are that face that need to fill that airtime. So the best way to say no was just to quit and to move on and to find something that I could find fulfilling and that gave me the flexibility that I needed at the time.
Did you feel like there was a little bit of retaliation or pushback when you set those boundaries at that time, when you started saying no?
Not retaliation, definitely pushback. Of course, producers want you to be on. Producers need to fill airtime. Producers need to have shows that they have to produce, and like I said, we are the face of those shows. And our contracts do say that you have to be available. Your TV contract does not say that you work from 9 to 5. It says that you must be available at all times when news is needed, and that we see a lot of flexibility for managers and producers to use you at all times when news is needed or when news demands. And that's what you signed up. I signed that contract willingly. I knew that was the role that I had, and nobody cheated me into this. Nobody said, oh yeah, we promised you a 9 to 5 job and now we're asking you to work 10 hours overtime. That's not the reality of it. You know where you're getting into. You just need to know when to step back and say, okay, it's been great. Now on to bigger and better things.
Yeah. And you are on to bigger and better things. I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of all your work, all the service that you gave your audience, and the dedication, because I had the privilege of, walking through the White House with you on certain occasions when I was also working there. And you are a true professional, extremely ethical, and really, really good at what you do. So thank you for that. And who knows, maybe you might come back into the news industry at some point. But for now, I'm happy that you're enjoying your family, that you are enjoying the benefits and enjoying the freedom that comes with a more flexible corporate job and not being tied to news 24/7.
Thank you. And that's all of this is not to say that that it was an easy decision to leave. I mean, I thought about it. I meditated on it. It took me about, I told you, about a full year before I even decided that I wanted to start looking. It was probably the toughest decision I've made in my life, because I also felt like if I left, it was a failure in the last 15 years. And once I realized, no, I've had a career. It's been a great career. And I can have a second go at another career and be successful and do new things and learn new skills. And I'm not done. This doesn't have to define me. The last 15 years were great, but they're not defining. And I can be another person, and then another person, and a person after that. So I have a lot to give. I told when I just want to give you one last anecdote. When I was interviewing for the role I have now, my last interview, this person said, well, it's a good thing that you're doing this now. You don't want to wake up 10 years from now and realize on all the things that you missed out on and why you didn't make the change then. And you wasted 10 years. I said, that's exactly right. Give me the job. I'll come work for you. And I'm glad I didn't wait another 10 years, that I'm doing it now. And maybe in 10 years, I'll go back. Who knows where 10 years will take me. But I've realized now that TV doesn't have to be an identity. You can have a full career, you can be successful, and then you can be successful at something else. And that's it. Life goes on.
Exactly. I love that. And we're allowed to, it's interesting because when I quit, I also felt like I was a failure. So I resonate a lot with what you just said, but it's not being a failure. It's redefining success. Our definition of success changes as we get older and we start prioritizing and valuing different things like family time, like spending holidays with loved ones, like not being tied to a job 24/7, waking up, breathing, living, eating news. So yeah, I more than thinking of it as a failure, which I love that you changed that narrative, is redefining success. And we're not failures if we decide to quit and leave news, something.
And we have so much to give. I'm in a role that I've never imagined. Internal comms is not PR, it's not media relations, it's not anything that I've ever thought I would be doing. It's a brand new thing that I didn't think I had the skills to do. And now I'm doing it. I'm loving it. I'm learning so much. And people are willing to give us opportunities. There are jobs for us out there. There are, we just bring so much to the table as journalists because we've done so much. Don't let anyone tell you that you cannot do anything other than TV, because we are just full of skills that are very transferable to many roles that do not have to be just the regular PR, media relations spokesperson. Like, we can do a lot of things.
Yeah, and we have very valuable skills. So Janet, thank you for your time. Thank you for being all those firsts in your career and paving the way for many of us. And yeah, let's stay in touch. I'm really, really happy for you and really happy to see that you're doing well in this new position.
And for you as well. Thank you. Thank you so much for reaching out. I'm glad to see everything you've done and you continue to accomplish as well. So we're mirroring each other. You've done it as well. You had a long, great career yourself. And yeah, when it's time, it's time. So I'm glad we're catching up in these terms, that we're getting to set our own path forward. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, and that's when you really feel like it's 100% worth it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Journalists, this one's for you, to help you heal, to help you understand your worth, and to help you know you're not alone. So share the love and subscribe to Spotify and YouTube, and follow us on Instagram. The Awakened Journalist is proud to present Media Healers by Emiliana Molina Fajardo.